Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a nice little coffee break. We're going to carry on this morning's discussions with our panelists here. And the point of this is to get them to draw on their own experiences, pull out the themes that really struck them from the case studies that we heard, talk about their own experiences, and then also get you all involved in the conversation about that as well. Let me go through and introduce them to you. First, sitting next to me, we have Heather Holdridge from the Planned Parenthood Federation of America. She's their Director of Digital Strategy. Bit of a round of applause there. You brought your friends with you.
Pack in the room, pack in the room.
Heather previously worked with Care2, which is an online community of more than 20 million people promoting healthy, green living, as well as social justice issues, and she led their political advocacy campaign. So I bet you have a lot of interesting things to tell us. Next to Heather is Chris Gebhardt, who's the Executive Vice President, Head of Digital at Participant Media. They've made documentaries in the past like An Inconvenient Truth and Waiting for Superman about education. Also dramas such as The Help and recently the brilliant Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. And he's also the general manager of Take Part, which is Participant's digital arm. And what's interesting about them is that they run social campaigns that are tied to the movies. And before that, he ran several digital startups involved in marketing and brand consultancy. So welcome, Chris. Next to Chris is Garth Moore, who's the US Deputy Director of New Media for the One campaign. I'm sure we all know who they are, but if you don't, the grassroots advocacy and campaigning organization co-founded by Bono. They have some 3 million members around the world, working primarily to combat poverty in Africa. And next to Garth is Jennifer Hauseman from the foundation. She's the manager of New Media, and in her role, she's launched the acclaimed Impatient Optimists blog, and also been busy raising the digital profile of Melinda Gates, who's doing much, much more these days. So let's welcome them all, first of all. And Heather, let me start with you, if I may. Thinking back to the case studies that we just saw before the break, what were the themes that really struck you, or what were the kind of overlapping points that you really thought were useful to this session? Sure.
Well, first of all, I'm thrilled to be here, and so with a lot of colleagues and people doing wonderful things. And I learned so much just by listening in the previous hour. Here were sort of 3 things that I was pulling out of this. Wendy said it explicitly, so I'll start there, which was about listening. And we do a lot of that at Planned Parenthood, that social media is not just a channel for pushing out content. And a lot of this theme sort of reverberated, I felt, from all of the participants. But it is about listening and seeing what's out there and what supporters and detractors might be saying about you or your issue. So
it's the very definition of interactivity, isn't it?
Well, exactly. That's exactly right. And I think nonprofits have moved or are moving, and this is a wide spectrum, right, from, oh, we have a Twitter feed, let's start just tweeting, right, and evolving from it as a channel to push out your content, but also to listen and to amplify other voices that are out there that reinforce whatever it is you're doing, or to push back and correct when needed. So that was the first thing. And the other 2 is really around letting go of control, which I see sort of 2 strands of that. One is, and several people touch on this, you can't control everything. It's just too big. There's just too much out there. But more importantly, I think, is that you can get better ideas, not consistently across the board, but if you're seeing what else is out there, and if 10 people are saying the same thing and you didn't even think about it, that's a way for you not only to improve your own campaign, but to demonstrate that first part, that you are listening and that you are a part of this broader community that's passionate about whatever it is your mission is.
So your core messaging really needs to be, it's not propaganda, it's a meme. You're establishing an idea, and then you're letting it out there and seeing where it goes, seeing what it comes back to you as, differently changed.
That's right, because it almost inevitably comes back different than how you put it out there.
But actually, what you're saying is that's what you want it to be. You want that to happen because you want people to have ownership of your idea as if it's something that they've come up with and they've modified to themselves.
That's right, and I mean I think we'll spend probably a lot of time. There are limits to that, right? There is a point beyond which that crosses over into a place you don't necessarily want it to be, and you might end up correcting it. But that is the nature of the work. And I think Aaron said this. There's the era of pitch perfect 24/7 is gone. And that resonated very strongly with me. So.
Okay. Chris, let's move to you. Coming from the sort of, your work in producing films is garnering audiences. And in marketing and consultancy as well, you're sort of going after an audience. So what do you make of the case studies that you've seen?
Well, the thing that kept resonating to me, and I thought your reference to Moore's Law was really apt and interesting, is how quickly the tools are empowering everybody to be involved. And the thing that we have talked a lot about over the past, participants going on 10 years old now, and we've done 40+ movies, and now I've had the digital arm up and going for the last 2 or 3 years. The thing that we really see is that empathy isn't enough. And I think this is something that, I believe it was Stephen Pincus talked about this in his book, that it's not enough just to, the compassion's not enough, right? That the passion actually comes from somebody seeing someone else doing something about something, getting involved with something else. And obviously the 1%, the 1-9-90 model, right? The 1% are the people who get involved, and the 9% are the ones who get influenced by that, and then you're hoping that you can trickle some of the 90% to do something. But the critical thing, I think, that behavioral science says is that it's the social construct that actually drives action. It's not enough to see somebody, hurt in the road. You're more likely to act if you see somebody else acting. And to really get large systemic changes happening, we've got to show people doing things, have people plugged into their social graphs, essentially, seeing other people being involved. So I was really excited to see a lot of the case studies using social media as a way to say, I'm doing this, and that hopefully that results in more people doing it, just because they're seeing it as a social norm now. So it's a little bit counterintuitive for a media company and for doing what we do to have that point of view. The film, the piece of content is just the starting point. It's got to be wrapped in that social experience, though, to really have the impact that we ultimately want to have, which is why we do the film in the first place.
And just explain briefly about the social campaign around the Best Exotic Married Hotel film. We were just talking about this earlier. And, I don't know if you've seen the film, but it's a very feel-good movie. And yet there is a social campaign attached to it. So just talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah, I'm sure. How many people have seen it? Because a pretty good chunk of folks. For every film, we do a social action campaign of some sort. So we're doing something. The reason why we make the film and invest in the film as participants is because we're trying to get some issue, some topic, something kind of teed up into the zeitgeist in some way. That oftentimes, though, conflicts with how traditional movie marketing is done, how film marketing is done. And we're not a distributor, so there's always a studio involved with the film. And so they take a traditional marketing approach to the film, and they oftentimes look a bit askance at this, don't turn my movie into a message movie. And so we always have to find ways to...
Why not? What's wrong with a message movie?
Well, people want to, if they're spending 10 or 12 bucks on a film, they want to be entertained, first and foremost. Oftentimes they want to be, particularly in today's environment, they want it to be a little bit escapist as well. So that's why documentaries generally don't get large box office. It's really, really difficult to get people to see something that is going to challenge them, that's going to make them think. They want to feel, but they also don't want to feel bad. So it's always a fine line that we're walking in the stuff that we do, and that's why we have really done almost every conceivable genre, from kind of straight on documentaries to zombie film. Called The Crazies a couple of years ago. So
what was the social campaign connected to the zombie?
That was about water safety and security, and it was a remake of a George Romero film. And if anybody is a horror film buff, I am. George Romero made films that always had a social subtext of some sort. And so for Marigold, the idea was, all right, we're going to give people an insight into what you can do with the second part of your life. That's what we wanted people to feel, that they could be doing something, and that's sort of what we felt the meta story was. And so the program, the campaign was Ideas for Good, submit us your ideas, driving at a 50+ audience, and we'll support them. We'll choose some and support them, and pick kind of a big winner at the end of the year and send you off with encore.org, send you off on a kind of a grand adventure.
And I think that ties into one of the themes that I noticed coming out of the case studies, which was that campaigns need to be fun for people. People don't want to be guilted into helping or getting involved. You agree?
Well, I wouldn't say they need to be fun. I take your point on the guilt piece. You don't want people like, I feel awful, I must do something, right? I hear that, but I mean, sometimes issues are serious and they require, that comes to authenticity and what you're really trying to get out of people. But I do think that it is about connecting with people in a way that's meaningful and real. And sometimes fun is great if you can pull it off. But the context matters, I guess is what I'm saying.
So, Garth, bearing that in mind, and also bearing in mind what Chris said about how empathy is no longer enough, when you're looking to alleviate some of the worst grinding poverty on earth in Africa, how do you make that fun for people?
Well, we have to, because with one, I mean, let's face it, Bono doesn't even have a Twitter account. So we're not boots on the ground at one. We're not out there providing the services. We are the advocates. We're supposed to be the voices who, that represent millions of people that are pushing on world leaders to fight extreme poverty and preventable disease. So we have to use a lot of different tactics in order to make this interesting, engaging, and try to make this from a grassroots, bottom-up engagement all the way up. So we do really try to employ all of our field organizers, all of our volunteers, both in the United States and Europe and in Africa as well. We try to empower them with their message. We try to give them assets that are creative, that are interesting, that are engaging, whether it's a Tumblr account where you're posting sweet potato recipes because you're trying to show that the sweet potato can be a symbol against chronic malnutrition, all the way up to a video where a bunch of celebrities use the F word, and the F word is actually famine, but you don't know this until about 30 seconds in. Great tools for advocates to go out and show to legislators, show to different people at different organizations, our partner organizations, and also to just show in their organizing efforts. They watch this video, they're intrigued, they're engaged, they want to do more about it. So having a lot of great media, a lot of great social assets, and a lot of great social messaging, if you can get that out to your advocates, just let them run with it and take it with you, take it for you. You can actually make a big dent in the whole social sphere in trying to cut through all the static to get your message out there.
Do you think the one campaign has an advantage because, I mean, it does have a perception of, it's a rock star campaign.
He doesn't have a Twitter account. I mean,
but he's still a rock star.
Yes, he's a rock star. He's a wonderful rock star. He's a great humanitarian.
But what I mean is, the kind of perception of the campaign is that it's younger, it's cool, and people using social media are largely younger. So do you have a kind of an advantage there?
Well, actually, I mean, truth be told, a lot of folks who like Bono are actually older.
That's true.
U2
is, my hand up
U2 is not a young person's group
I can't claim that anymore.
I mean, U2 is great in that sense that they are very popular with a wide swath of people globally. And everywhere that U2 went on their last tour, one was there signing up people to join the movement. And in some places like Mexico City, we were getting 20,000 people to sign up. These were people who were just hungry for change. And U2 really gave us a great platform for that. But I mean, Bono is not in our day in, day out operations. He is much more of a meta thinker. He is way out there on the level that probably, except for our senior board, nobody at our organization is doing. So it really comes down to the same thing that every other organization here works with every day. We have to communicate with people. We have to listen to them. We are using our social tools to try to engage with them. And in that sense, we're just like every other nonprofit. We do have a wonderful persona of being cool, and it's also a burden because you always have to do the cool things.
I find it a burden to be cool.
It's tough to be cool, let me tell you. But it's also what we have to be with that is we also have to be relevant and we have to be engaging. And so you can't just gloss over the message in trying to be cool. There really has to be substance there. So when we're working with partners like at Oxfam or the UN Foundation, we're not trying to gloss over the issues. What we're trying to do is give a different lens on how you look at those issues, make it really engaging, no matter what your audience age or demographic is. And really try to bring them into this campaign. And that's why we're such an open group. We rely on messages from partners, from organizers, from different components all over, just trying to make this happen.
And that actually is interesting because it reminds me of something that Wendy Levy just said to me in the break, and I'm going to steal it, Wendy, thank you. She was talking about how, she was reflecting on the case studies we heard, and she was talking about how what's really interesting to her is that the digital tools are changing all the time. There's so many more tools available. But what's really important is the message, is the core content.
Yes, always. And the goal. And that's the one thing that I think a lot of people miss when they put together social campaigns is there are goals there that you really are trying to attain. Now, sometimes they're very, very lofty goals, like ending animal cruelty. Well, I mean, that's so far down the road, we'll probably never do that. But no matter what those goals are, you know, you're employing your advocates to try to reach those goals. So if it's something like the Gavi vaccine campaign that we ran last year and working with Gavi to try to get more funding for global vaccinations, you know, we want to make our members part of that. We want to give that message to them, and we want to show them that, look, here's a goal out there, and it's got those 4 pillars of urgency, jeopardy, action, and proof. And so when you're putting together those campaigns, you want to show what the jeopardy is. You want to show the urgency around this. You want to show the right kind of action. Is it going to be a phone call? Is it going to be a tweet at an influential? You know, what is going to be the action that's going to drive people to want to help attain that goal? And you have to show them the proof. What
Urgency, jeopardy, action, and proof.
Okay. Yeah, jeopardy, urgency, action, proof.
Okay.
And if you can build a campaign on those 4 pillars and have a goal in mind, you've got a whole communication strategy right there.
Do people in the room recognize that? That all chimed with you? That's interesting, okay. Jennifer Hauseman from the foundation, having seen the case studies, what do you think makes a successful digital campaign?
So a key theme that I heard was amplification, and it seems like in putting together this day, the team, the incredible colleagues that I have here that put together this program, were really thinking about case studies that had enough in common and then sort of pivoted off of each other enough. And I think the word amplification keeps coming up again and again, that part of what I heard was that no one's sort of doing it alone, whether it's Aaron and Bloggist leveraging the intense interest of mommy bloggers to sort of have that baton relay. There's just this sense of sort of shared partnership across these campaigns, Malaria No More and what they did with Ashton Kutcher. And I know, this is part of why it's exciting to be on this panel right now, is these are some of the rock stars that we work with every day. And sitting in the foundation seat, one of the things that's really compelling is to be able to sort of have the glimpses into the work that everyone's doing and then act as a convener to bring everyone together to share those case studies. So I think the amplification piece, just having a better sense of how we can collaborate and how we can work together, because there are so many shared interests across the specific issue areas and then also across the sort of social good sector more broadly, is something that I think is one of the goals of this day and what the case studies really spoke to strongly this morning.
To build on that, because I think that's a really good point, and it's something we talk a lot about, the idea of amplification, and even in some of the stuff that we've done with you guys over the last year or so. But one of the things I wanted to say that I think is interesting to think about is that that's not unique to this social good sector. That's anyone who has a message, every brand. The private sector is sitting there scrambling around doing the exact same thing. And I sort of, I kind of stand astride both. We're a for-profit company doing essentially not-for-profit stuff, right? And so we've got our goal ultimately is to infuse what we're doing from a social good perspective with the stuff that we're learning on the for-profit side. And so what's fascinating, I think, is, brands, corporations, the big thing right now is all about storytelling. Right? It's all about storytelling. They need to be storytellers. And that's been kind of building for the past decade or so for a lot of different reasons. But now everyone's starting to really think about, okay, just because I made the story, just because I funded the content series, just because I have a team now that's doing brand journalism or branded content or whatever you want to call it, doesn't mean that people are getting the message, doesn't mean I'm reaching my audience with that message. And so my point is that everyone's facing this same kind of challenge when we talk to our brand clients or when we working with foundations. We're seeing that same kind of thing. You've still got to get the message to somebody that would be receptive to it and that would be interested in acting on it and give them ways to actually plug into it and do something with it so that then they become ultimately the amplification network. And that's the social reinforcement that I was talking about that I think is so important to move beyond just empathy as a way to get people to act.
So this speaks to what one of our previous speakers was talking about identifying, in that kind of massive, group of audience, potential audience, who are your key influencers for what you particularly want to do. So in a way, you're kind of using these tools that allow you to reach millions of people to narrowcast.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a successful tool. That's a kind of important tool in a successful strategy.
A piece I would add on to that. So in the afternoon session, which unfortunately won't be live streamed but will be available on video, we're going to be talking about network maps. And what's really interesting is we see Planned Parenthood, we see One, we see Take Part, all in our network maps as sort of hubs of conversation. And so as we're thinking about these campaigns or sort of trying to build awareness, it's not necessarily at all about the total number or total reach. It's really about sort of the quality connections that we see within the community and really trying to identify who those partners are. And since everyone has limited budget, everyone has limited time, invest in those relationships in a very sort of real world way.
Did you have a point to make?
No, I was just actually thinking about mapping as well, and part of what we're trying to do, and I saw it from a lot of the different panelists as well that were here with their case studies, was it was showing your reach. And I think that's a great visualization. We love the work that Usha Hidi does and a number of folks who, if you can actually show what your outreach is and you can show the different faces of who's taking part. You know, we get a lot of celebrities to tweet about One in our message in some of our campaigns, and those are always great, and you always love to see them. But the most exciting thing for me was when we just recently ran a campaign where we were asking David Cameron to kind of stand up at the next G8 when it's in the UK next year for global hunger. And also at the Hunger Summit that he was holding right after the Olympics. And we ran a global Twitter map, and just watching the map zoom around from country to country and state to state and province to province everywhere, and just seeing all these pins pop up was a billion times more exciting than having a celebrity tweet, because you're actually showing the influence. I think that it's micro, but it's so much more macro in a way. That you're getting to people in all of these different countries. You're creating advocates out of all these different people.
But how do you then know that they're actually doing something about it?
Well, you have to do the follow-up. I mean, obviously, you know, it's outside baseball, but you also have to have an inside game as well. When we're creating a kind of a social change campaign, when we're looking at our theory of change, it definitely has a lot of the inner components of, you know, we have people who are talking to people in Cameron's office or up on the Hill, talking to different legislators about it. So we'll know where to push in the right way. And really what our grassroots is there to do is to push our advocacy efforts to say, okay, you've heard about this in your office meetings, you've heard about it from some of our volunteer meetings in the district. Now you're going to see the full weight of the grassroots who really does believe in this message, and we're going to bring those messages to you to show you that there are people who care about this issue.
And I actually think that point that Garth's making is critical, where you know, the social media work that you do shouldn't be existing in a vacuum, right? You shouldn't just say, my gosh, you know, this celebrity wants to tweet on us, push it out. Right? Not that that doesn't have value, but that we're consistently trying to integrate whatever we're doing so that it amplifies and helps the work of our government relations team, for example, because they are on the Hill and they are talking to senators and representatives every day. And so we have a relationship with them so that they can say, hey, Senator Shaheen is doing this amendment on X today. Can you please be sure to, you know, push out to our advocates that we're doing this, so that they then strengthen their relationship and their trust with the relationships that they have, and that helps our organization as a whole.
You know, and to a point to that, when we're putting together a campaign, I mean, the goal is not 5,000 tweets. I mean, that may be something you're looking at in your metrics, and you can judge whether you're reaching your membership to get them to do that. The goal is, are they going to pass legislations or appropriations that are going to help fund the world's poorest? And that should always be the goal of any digital team. Your metrics are great. Of course, watch your metrics and follow them, but really do keep the big picture in mind, because advocates can sniff out tactics that aren't sincere. I mean, they'll look at this and just think, well, if there's no impact, if I'm not seeing those 4 pillars that I talked about, I don't really want to participate with this campaign. This is not going to be the one for me. But if you can show them that you're going to make an impact on this greater goal, again, having that goal and working with that in mind, I think is greater than any metrics sheet. And in a way, you almost will, like when you're doing the postmortem on your campaign, save page 2 for all your quantitative stuff. Put your qualitative stuff on page 1. What were the goals? Did we achieve those goals? Did we move a clear theory of change and actually make an impact?
I want to just raise a point that Wendy Harman brought up in the last session. Yes, yeah, don't look so surprised. There were lots of good points, but I want to just talk about one. You said that I think it was 76% of people expect help to arrive within 3 hours of them posting on a social media site when there's been a disaster. And it made me think about expectations of digital campaigns and whether expectations of digital campaigns can be too high sometimes. And do you have any examples you'd care to share with us of campaigns that have not succeeded?
Probably more than I want, more than any of you want. But yeah, we've run campaigns before where we're like, you know, go send this message to Congress, and then you look at your stats the next day, and the email open rate isn't great, or the click-through rate's not great, and suddenly you're not getting a ton of these actions. And really, I think someone else on the panel said, you've got to go back and recalibrate. You've got to try it anyway. I would rather have loftier goals than try to do something that's just meager and doesn't push an edge and doesn't get, you know, to the bottom of things. Because if you fail, you fail, but at least you're trying. And at least if you're pushing out there, you can make a difference. And if that goal of 50,000 tweets turns out to be 30,000, I'd much rather do that than set a goal for 10,000 and try to just live with something that isn't really pushing the edge.
Go ahead.
No, but I think there's a broader point too, which is certainly in grassroots advocacy work where you're trying to get a bill passed or something like that. Certainly, most of your grassroots advocates understand that it takes more than just this one email that you've sent out asking people to sign a petition that's going to go to their member. And that's where I think some of what Chris has said resonates and comes into play, which is this is a campaign is not, I sent out an email and I asked people to tweet this week. It is something that happens over the course of months, in some cases years, to get from point A to point B. And it is about telling a story, creating a narrative so that people understand they're on a, you know, I hesitate to use the word journey, but it is a journey, right? Where you can show milestones, you can show progress with the understanding that this is going to take us a while to get from point A to point B. And I'll use one quick example from Planned Parenthood. You know, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, became law in March of 2010. And effectively, since then, we've been in an ongoing advocacy campaign around birth control access for women as preventive health care in this country. And there are milestones where we win this, and then there's a setback, and then there's a fight about this, and then, right? So it's an ongoing process, and people understand that even if this week maybe you didn't get where you needed to be, the next time when you really need them, when the chips are really down, it's not coming out of nowhere.
Just to add to that, I think I was struck by some stats you've shared in the past with us about how when you guys subbed in the image, I stand with Planned Parenthood for people's Facebook photos, that's not something you do the first time you hear about Planned Parenthood, right? That's a high-level social status type of request for people to do. And one of the conversations we had about this convening is, you know, is it digital and audience or is it digital and community? Community building is a very sort of soft, warm word, you know, but in a lot of ways that is what I think is a common thread.
The community implies listening. Audience may not.
Yeah, and it
listening
implies
to what they're saying, listening to what they're saying back to you. Participation, that's what I mean, yeah.
It implies, I think, a reciprocity that is sort of another theme of a lot of what was shared this morning, that it's not purely a broadcast play, but much more about sort of doing that social status share with, you know, your organization and the individual and that sort of back and forth.
I wanted to amplify something that Garth said a minute ago about the qualitative being really, really important and how you evaluate what you're doing, and a way in which you can use your social channels too is to capture the story, right? An example that just hit me as you were saying that, and that I like to talk about is one that's very personal for us, and you might have heard me talk about this in meetings. But we made an Inconvenient Truth, released that almost 5 years ago now. And fast forward, I moved to a community in Southern California called Manhattan Beach. And there's a group there called Grades of Green at my kids' elementary school that my wife then got involved with. And it turns out that it's this really cool curriculum about sustainability that they have put into the elementary school. It's now expanded. They're going to put it into all of LAUSD. It's a really, really cool program that uses the parents, teaches the parents who then teach the kids. That was all inspired by an Inconvenient Truth. And I had no idea until I happened to be at a party and was talking to the co-founder, and I said, oh, this is such a great program. You know, how did it get started? She had no idea where I worked and what I did. And she said, oh, well, a bunch of us saw An Inconvenient Truth. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. That's, you know, like, that's a total, you know, goosebump moment. She said, then 2 years later, we saw Food Inc. And I'm like, wow, that's another one of ours. That they took the program in to create trash-free lunch and other things. The point is that's really where it gets exciting. The metrics set up some way of understanding kind of the impact that you're having, but you've got to capture the stories too. You've got to have that front page, that first page, the qualitative, the things that are happening that really bring to life what your efforts are to, I think, really keep people engaged with it. That's where the narrative is.
And that's the kind of physical involvement, the kind of emotional contact with something. Yeah. That's the kind of key component of any campaign. You've got to actually, you know, it's fine to make the campaign easy. People can just, you know, have one-click engagement. They can do it from the, you know, from the ease of their computer, but they've got to have that emotional connection.
Well, another part of the lesson from that specific experience for me has been there's no way on earth we would have thought about that. We would have never said, you know what, this is what we want. We want to have people starting elementary-based green education. Like, we would have never thought of that. So the kind of the things that get unleashed by whatever the program is, having a moment to capture that, and it may take 2 or 3 years, and you happen to be at a party and you find it out, but it's really something to celebrate. That's when you know people are taking it and doing something with it. That's really exciting. And
that's also what we heard earlier about allowing your content, your message to evolve out there with your audiences.
Exactly.
Okay. I think we should try and open it up now to some questions and comments from all of you guys as well. So has anybody got something they'd like to say in response to what our panelists have said, or questions they'd like to ask, or your own experiences to share? Do we have those mics? Again, those roving mics. I think there's a lady down here. And again, if you could just stand up and introduce yourself and fire away.
Hi, I'm Katie Bisbee from DonorsChoose.org, and we have a tiny social media team, and any minute we spend on social media, I personally feel like we have to justify a lot because we have so much other stuff we could be doing. So I hear so much about the word listening, and while we do a little bit of listening, we probably don't do the best job possible, but it's probably because I haven't really found a great example or a great reason why we should listen. And I think that story is one of the best examples of listening. Like, you're actually finding out the stuff that should go on page 1 of your report. What other examples do you guys have that are equally as powerful that have actually come from listening? Like, have there been any major shifts to your campaigns that you've discovered from listening to people? Has listening ever changed your model or your vision? Has it ever launched another campaign? Do you test campaigns through listening? I guess, like, help me go back to my office in New York and tell my social media team they need to spend more time listening.
Well, I've got one that is specific to that, to being open information and changing. On Waiting for Superman, which we worked very closely with Donors Choose on and had some great programs with. In fact, if you went to the movie, you could text, and you immediately got a virtual gift card to Donors Choose. But we changed we had built the campaign and what we wanted to accomplish, and it was built around 4 kind of key goals. But we changed it dramatically, the digital experience, 3 times within 2 months, based on the feedback we were getting from people screening the film. We screened the film like 100 times before it was released. And based on the questions that people were asking, what they were saying, what they wanted to know, we literally went into this constant change cycle and completely redid the navigation, as I said, 3 times, because what we had thought people would ask and were interested in, it wasn't the case. They were interested in a whole other set of things. So we changed the language, we changed the approach, we changed a bunch of different things. And I think that's, you've got to find ways to get that information and then be ready to react to it, what you were talking about as well.
Yeah, and you can get ideas, some great ideas from people if you're watching the people who are retweeting you or using your hashtags or whatever. A lot of times we get great ideas for our organizers. Someone will say, hey, I'm doing this type of event in Chicago today for one campaign, and suddenly you realize, oh, that's a really good type of an event. we can give that to our field team, and they can get our organizers in other states to do it. A lot of times we spy on all our partners who are out here because we love you all so much. And we see what they're tweeting about and what they're using, and we ask them, would you like to contribute to our blog, or give us some more content so we can show people what you're doing in the fight in poverty. So, I mean, those are just two examples, but really what you're trying to do by listening is not just answering questions, but getting inspiration from the people who are tweeting about you. And you have such a great reputation in the cause world, and you have so many people who love you that when people are talking about the different types of things that they're doing for Donors Choose, you can start taking those ideas and just putting them down. And at any strategy meeting, all of your seniors would love to have those pieces of paper sitting there with all the comments and ideas of what everybody's saying to you in the Twitterverse or on Facebook.
I'll just make one quick point for somebody like Donors Choose that does such great work, which is you can't brag about how great you are very comfortably, right? People are like, whoa, step off. Well, actually, I hate these 5 things about you, right? But when you have other people saying, oh my God, Donors Choose is amazing, they helped our organization do X, or they helped me do Y, or what have you, then you get 2 benefits out of that by listening. One is you can retweet it, which signifies you were listening, you've been paying attention to that conversation and what they're saying about you. But 2, it also allows other people to do the bragging on your behalf, right? So that's great, Jimmy. Thank you so much for your support, or we're glad we could be a part of your success, or whatever, however you want to say that. But that's a way for you to help spread the word and build that affinity with people who support you and get a lot out of the platform that you provide.
Part of my studies in public diplomacy has involved looking at how people are influenced. And it's well known that if you tell me how brilliant you are, I may not really believe you. But if I overhear the person next to you saying to someone else, she's really brilliant, that's likely to convince me more. It's about, overhearing things as well. I thought that was interesting about, what you talked about. You mentioned, Katie, that you can't really justify, or you find it hard to justify to your social media team that they should be spending a lot of time on campaigns when they have lots of other things to do. And I wondered what those other things were that are competing for your time.
Let me first give the caveat that we don't ignore our community. We just might not spend as much time as some of the people on the panel. For us, what we do, our mission is to get resources.
There's a mic for you there.
Oh, thank you. Our resources is to get, our mission is to get resources into classrooms that are not currently there. So anytime I'm doing any work, or my team is, that's not directly driving dollars into classrooms, that's something that is very difficult to justify. We definitely do spend time on social media. I think that there's a lot of benefit to having people talking. There's a lot of benefit to advocacy. But at the end of the day, every 40 hours a week I work, I'm gonna spend the most hours I possibly can on I guess, getting dollars into classrooms. So the longer lead sort of awareness building is difficult to justify as a small, very entrepreneurial, almost like e-commerce based nonprofit who doesn't have an advocacy team.
I think maybe the session this afternoon will talk a little bit about the metrics and measurements you can use that you can justify to your boards what you're doing. But I wonder, does anybody else have similar experiences that they sometimes struggle to justify the work they're doing in the social media campaigns? Lady in the green over there, you're nodding. Maybe you can get your experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Teresa Gillian, working at PATH, an international global health organization, and I think we face the same thing. How much time do we spend on awareness building? How much time do we spend on getting unrestricted dollars in the door? And how much time do we spend on advocating? So working in institutional communications, that's always our juggling act. So would love to hear how other people approach that.
Well, in that instance, I think listening then becomes lead generation. In a way, maybe not in the most direct way, but what you're trying to do with some of the examples that Heather gave and some of these others that I gave is you're trying to build these advocates for your cause and get out to their networks and get their networks contributing to you. It's very hard. You've got to use a lot of tools to figure out what their reach is and who they're communicating to. You're not always going to get a direct ROI back in dollars and cents from their overall reach. But in that sense, I wouldn't even call it awareness building. I really would call it something more like lead generation because it sounds better. but then it also it gives you more of a reason to want to go out and do that, because you're going to want to make champions out of these people who are communicating with you and really try to get them to be the messengers to get out there and to get more funds into your classrooms.
Gentleman in grey.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sebastian from UNICEF. I will talk about the metrics later, but it's interesting we talk about digital strategies here and we end up talking about listening and metrics already, so I kind of felt like I have to jump in quickly.
You're not going home early, is it?
No, all right, cool. It comes before the actual campaign already, right? And this is something that we hear as well. Listening, measuring, and finding interesting content, interesting stories comes already before you start actually communicating. So listening comes before getting attention. You have to give attention, and that's something that I just wanted to add to this discussion here, because we just see it happening right now. Before we actually start communicating with people, we listen to them, see what are their needs, and how can we craft content that is highly contextual to these people. Because at the end of the day, we want to add value to an existing discussion. We don't want to open a new one, It's just something on my heart here.
I'm sorry, I hope I haven't stolen your thunder, Jennifer, for this afternoon. I see you're scribbling down the notes there.
That's perfect, yes.
But does that ring bells with you guys? I mean, is putting the listening right at the front of the campaign, is that what you do?
Yeah, in any part of campaign planning, you've got to figure out what your audience is willing to do. You've got to figure out what the buy-in is going to be with your audience. So as you're building your campaign from the inside, it may look like a really great campaign because you've put it together with the great minds that are in your organizations or your partners, et cetera. But you really need to know what your audience is going to do. And really, you can even look to last campaigns or previous efforts to see what they're going to do. So as you're doing those quantitative and qualitative metrics, as you're putting together the postmortems from your campaign, that's also a type of listening, because you're going to see that these are tactics that either worked or didn't, or could they lead to different tactics that might work differently for the next campaign. And then try to bring that together in your campaign planning for the next one.
And I don't know how often folks in this room, with the work that they're doing, where you're sort of in the moment and things are moving very quickly and changing. But certainly we might put out a campaign. I'll just use the birth control really briefly. Again, we were in the middle of a struggle on Capitol Hill in about February this year around it, and we were not doing great. And so we were pushing our advocacy out, sort of standard stuff, people up on the Hill. We have petition online. We're doing stuff on Facebook, Twitter, what have you. And then, so we had our plan for the morning, and then we were being asked to live tweet a congressional hearing. We're like, boring, right? Government oversight, boring, right? But we're like, fine, we'll do it. And incredibly insightful. So we agreed to live tweet this. Our government relations team said, hey, this is happening, check it out. And we're like, okay, great. And within 5 minutes, the hearing starts, and they have the shot of the panelists, and they're all men in a panel about women's access to contraception. And so the plan went out the window in about 30 seconds. And so there's a screenshot of the panelists, and that became the campaign for the next 3 or 4 days. And for those who might have followed it, I actually would argue it really turned the tide, because it changed the story and the frame of that particular issue away from the way it had been talked about to why are a lot of men talking about whether women have access to birth control, which put them in an awkward position. And so that's where the listening, I think, can really help you figure out, okay, well, what we're doing is fine, but this is going to change the game, or it could change the game.
Let's get some more comments from people in the audience who'd like to make a comment, contribute, share your experiences, ask questions. Oh, Chris.
Build on that for 2 seconds. I think there's an interesting note there about the power of storytelling, and that storytelling isn't just video. It isn't just films. It isn't. Storytelling can be literally that picture, right? That's a really amazing, powerful message to take away from that. That you're always looking for that kind of thing that communicates, and lots of things can communicate.
And that's a story that lends itself very well to a digital campaign, more so than
produced content. Take 5 minutes and watch this, as opposed to take 2 seconds and immediately read what's wrong with this picture, right?
But that tension between traditional media campaigns, traditional produced content, and digital campaigns, I mean, we're all in this room, we're talking about digital campaigns, so we're sort of focused on that, and we're all a little bit obsessed with it. And it is the kind of the new direction for communications. But is there a risk of overstating the importance of digital, or not?
It's a means to an end. It's like everything else. It's every other channel. It's the same as direct mail. It's the same as print. Granted, technology is making some forms of print and old world media a little bit more obsolete. But the importance of a digital campaign, again, they're strategies and tactics for your overall goal, and they are a means to an end. So any Twitter campaign or Facebook campaign or YouTube campaign that you're going to put together is just one channel in getting you to your overall goal. And as long as you can treat it like that and look at it with that lens, you'll realize that they're just tactics and they're things that you need to maneuver. But really what you then can focus on is, what is the story? What's the urgency? How am I getting my members to take action?
I think, Jennifer.
I think there's a slightly different twist on that question too, which is sometimes with digital, everything can be measured, so therefore everything should be measured, and then you get into sort of metrics mania. And I think one of the things that's really nice about what your story tells about the inconvenient truth and the sort of community building that generated is there is a point too where sort of the pixels stop and the measurement stops, and that can be just as valid a point of the work as what is able to be shown through digital measurement. And making sure those things are in balance is often a challenge with a lot of this work.
Well, and I think that goes back to the panel this morning, where talking about making it personal, creating emotional resonance and connection by, it's not just we have helped 1,000 people. It's like, we helped Sally. And here's Sally's story, and here was what happened. Here's what her situation was prior to the work that we as a community did, and here's where she is now. And that's where people get emotional. They're not emotional because, oh, we helped 1,000 people. It's like, Sally's life was changed. That matters.
Because they can relate to that person on a one-to-one basis.
Because it might be their sister, their mother, their whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in news coverage as well, we look for that case study as well, because we try to make an emotional connection between the audience and the person they're watching. That this could be your child, this could be, your family member, to make a wider point. That's interesting.
I think, though, one of the things that is interesting about digital, to speak in defense of digital for a second, is, and I think that this was one of the takeaways from the prior panel as well in the case study, is that there are a lot of examples now where the digital is more than just a channel. It's more than just a communication vehicle. It actually is the vehicle for impact happening. You're talking about the Red Cross and what you're developing, talking about something like Ushahidi, talking about having skill sets that you have that you can immediately apply in some way. It's nothing to do with resource generation, awareness, or anything else. I'm actually part of the change. I can do that now. I think that that's really amazing. And that's, again, getting back to your reference to Moore's Law at the beginning, that's all something that's been really enabled over the past 10 years, and that's incredible. That's an amazing world-shrinking thing that's happened, that somebody in the Ushahidi story is it, right? Somebody in Boston can help translate tweets from somebody in the rubble in Haiti and help the U.S. Navy find them. That's incredible.
That's a very good example. Let's get some more points. Anyone hasn't spoken today so far? At the back. Sorry, I can't remember your name.
It's Michael, sorry.
Thank you, Mike.
So I think that for everyone who works on digital, and certainly the examples you've given us, there's a clear connection between the work you're doing and actual impact, right? That you wouldn't, most of us wouldn't be still doing this work, or we've taken the years needed to figure that out, and your examples show that. And there's still more to go, of course. But some of the comments earlier also reflect something that certainly we see within different Greenpeaces, but at many organizations, which is the gap between the work that's being done by folks in the room and leadership or executive directors. So I'm curious, if your executive directors were on this panel, so either this is a softball or a hard one, I don't know, but if your EDs were on this panel, how would they be answering the question about what role, what impact digital is having towards the mission and towards the overall organizational work? And another way to answer that might be just, I'm curious what you're doing. If it's not where you want it, what kind of stuff are you doing to change the organization and close that gap?
Who'd like to start? Garth.
One CEO is on Twitter. He has his own Twitter handle. He tweets cones and things about recipes and his favorite football teams in the UK, Michael Elliott, and he tweets a lot about our issues. So from this sense, I think Michael would be all for all of the tactics we're doing. But then again, we're very lucky in the sense that Michael also is a media person. He was managing editor for Time International. He understands the value of a story. He understands the value of a blog, or even better, he understands the value of a blog comment, and social media as well. So he's very well versed in it. And I think a lot of the directions that we are starting to do now at One, he would fully back. Now, granted, he's not working with us day in, day out on these campaigns, but from a meta level, he can very much support the work and the efforts that we're doing.
Others? How would you answer that, Heather? How would you answer that question?
I would say there's 100% buy-in among our executive team, including Cecile Richards, who is the president of Planned Parenthood. And Cecile does have her own Twitter handle. She also has both a personal Facebook page, which of course we don't go anywhere near, and then it's sort of a professional public figure fan page, which we help manage. So there's absolute buy-in around that. I think that what's changed for Planned Parenthood is, and this is prior to my arrival there, but there was a fight in Congress where they were threatening to defund Planned Parenthood in the winter and early spring of 2011, and coming out of that, which we successfully were able to avoid, there was a recognition that we needed to create robust social media channels, not just for our advocacy, but also on the health side of what we do. And so there was a strategic decision made at that time that we were going to build out unique teams for both. So that, to me, answers a question, which is, Michael's question, which is, we've put resources into amplifying and building out what our internal capacity is and our ability to respond both on the healthcare provider side of the work that we do and to build those relationships, and also on the advocacy side of what we do.
Michael, how would your organization respond to that?
For us, we're seeing, so Greenpeace grew up in a basically pretty traditional media era where it was able to by itself influence targets, media, et cetera, without any kind of without much citizen involvement, right? Compared to the landscape today, and now we're seeing in our campaigns essentially the kind of a critical that we can't win our campaigns because without people power, or digital media that enables people power, because most of the targets we're going after, the campaigns we are trying to win, can only be won through people pressure. So it's, for us, there's support because it's critical to win bigger and raise more money. But it's a transition, I think, there like everywhere else.
Let's get a point from Jeremy over here.
Yeah, we've rightly focused a lot on the factors for success, and I just wondered, what are the real no-nos? Because sometimes you see often commercial companies get it horribly wrong in the social media space. My personal most recent favorite is the I Love Waitrose, because it's Waitrose is like the UK equivalent of Whole Foods here, which got hijacked last week with hilarious results. But I just wonder, what are the no-nos, and what have you observed? The factors to avoid when really sort of tackling this space.
You got one there, Heather?
That's a good, what are the no-nos? I think exclusively talking at people, which we've talked a little bit about. Maybe that's my easy, chip shot answer. But talking at people, not listening, not adjusting when you hear it, when you get that feedback. I think and this is going to date me a little bit, but there's an old West Wing episode where Josh Lyman, the deputy chief of staff, someone comments at him, he's like, I'm going to write him back, I'm going to write him back. And he ends up in this day-long, he just goes down the rabbit hole, right, where he ends up getting into this back and forth with this person who is essentially a troll. And I think that is something you try to avoid, which is to end up in a conversation and a dialogue with someone who you're not going to win the day or win the discussion with them. It's best to just correct misinformation or factual things that are factually incorrect and move on to other people. And we're fortunate, and I'm sure this is true of a lot of other people here, where we have supporters who then can kind of step in and take over the defense or support of Planned Parenthood as needed. So I guess that's what
And then Chris, so no-nos or, the flip side of that, yes, yeses.
Well, to
sum up.
the thing that I went to from an example perspective is we have a fairly large community around the Film Food Inc. on Facebook, and it's a very active community, and it's a very diverse community in that it has attracted everyone from, very, anti-GMO to anti-vaccine. It's sort of a mix. And the thing that just popped in my head when you asked that question was, we do a immunization program, every fall. Everybody gets a flu shot if you want it, because we also did the film Contagion. Mm-hmm. Last year we were doing the film Contagion, so we thought at it, fun little bit of cross-pollination, and we posted pictures of the participant team getting some flu shots. And there was a large group of people on the Food Inc. community who think this is really awful, and they immediately kind of pounced. And we ended up with a great discussion, though, right? It was really interesting and fun to kind of watch it happen. And I guess to me, the takeaway is I would hope that we would continue to be willing to do that, as opposed to feeling cowed by the fact that there's going to be some trolls, that there's going to be some people who don't disagree, or who do disagree with whatever we're saying. There's always going to be that. And you just have to kind of keep pushing forward and hope the conversation goes in the direction that you want it to and that's productive, but what you really want people to do is engage on it. So just keep pushing forward with it. Don't stop.
And Garth and Jennifer, just for you to sum up, no-nos or must-haves for campaigns.
No-nos, insincerity. Don't be insincere. Don't be flip when you can be earnest. Don't be trite when you can be meaningful. Your audience can take it. I mean, obviously you want to be humorous, you want to be funny, you want to have a different kind of message depending on the audience or the campaign. But really, if you're insincere, they're going to know almost immediately. And it's going to permeate everything that you do, because eventually then you start pulling up tactics to just throw something at something that's going to make it work. And really, if you're sincere about the goals and what you're trying to do and the change you're trying to create, the tactics and the fun things and the engaging things and the influence that you're trying to create will come naturally from that, because you've got your goal set in the right place, and then with a couple of brainstorms, you'll look up at that whiteboard and you'll see it's completely full, and then from there it's just a matter of implementing it, correcting, and really making sure that you've got buy-in from the bottom up to make this a successful grassroots campaign.
And Jennifer?
I guess the only thing I would add as a no-no is there was a great story that started on Jezebel and wound up on Reddit and Mashable about a woman who was in line at the airport who an anonymous person took a photo of her and was making fun of her appearance. And she found it and commented and schooled him, and he apologized. And I think the interesting piece about that story for us from the foundation side is knowing that those digital distances are shrinking. And so we always have to assume that any photo we use or any story we tell, the person that we've captured a photo from, which may seem like sort of the ends of the earth from our position here in Seattle, could comment on that. So even just what Kate was presenting earlier, our Chief Communication Officer, about our website redesign, we want to have in mind that the person profiled in that initial beautiful image might have a Twitter handle and might want to hear from people as sort of an end beneficiary of our work. So just kind of keeping in mind that those gaps are gone. If they're not completely gone, they will be certainly in the next few years.
Manuel Castells, that great academic, calls it the death of space and the death of time. On which note, I think we have to, on which cheery note, I think we have to wrap up. Let me thank our panelists, Heather Holdridge from Planned Parenthood, Chris Gebhardt from Participant, Garth Moore from One, and Jennifer Hauseman from the Foundation. Now, it's time for lunch, you'll be glad to know. But as I said before, lunch is not just a time to switch off, it's also a time to converse about the themes. And I think we have a slide to show you there are certain themes that they want you to group up into. So pick a theme you like: developing key narratives, building a campaign web presence, fundraising from creative sources, validators and champions, engaging hard-to-reach audiences, globalization and localization. So pick a theme that you like. Gather around those tables, carry on the conversation after lunch, and those will be very useful for you for the practical exercise later on this afternoon. We'll reconvene at 1:30 for the session on managing risk and reputation online. And that, by the way, also marks the end of the webcast, which I think we've had nearly 1,000 people watching around the world, which is fantastic. So everyone wave goodbye to the webcast audiences, and we'll see you after lunch. Thank you.